Hello everyone, welcome to topic 6. I hope this video finds you well. You reached this video by downloading the course notes and then going through the link that you found embedded in the course notes for this YouTube video. This YouTube video will deal with topic 6, which is a more in-depth look at the 5 building characteristics we discussed in topic 5. Okay, and those building characteristics were major occupancy, building area, building height, the number of streets that a building is facing, and whether that building is sprinklered or unsprinklered. And the whole point of topic 6 is to make sure that we're all clear about each of these 5 items. Topic 6 is going to be a bit more of a dry one, I admit it, and it's been split therefore into 2 videos. So further on in your course notes you'll find another link to a YouTube video for you to click and reach. Otherwise, I think I would put you to sleep by the end of this video. Okay, so I split it into 2. So before I go on, a final reminder too about these set of course notes. Be sure to download them to your device of choice. You never know when you'll lose access to Brightspace, and you want to make sure that these course notes are saved to your device of choice. Right? That way they're always available to you, whether you print them out or just use the electronic form of them. Okay? It's okay. Okay, so let's dive into this. Let's start with major occupancy. When we looked at topic 5, we learned about those 63 articles related to each and every occupancy, right? And division. Well, what happens though if a building you're analyzing has more than one major occupancy, which is normally the case? So in this case, we have an example that you can see on the screen and is also in your course notes. We have an unsprinklered building, 3 stories, a building area of 2,000 square meters, and it's facing 3 streets. Specifically, the occupancies that I can see here are either C or D. Okay, so the building has 2 different occupancies in it. So how do we figure this out? How do we figure out the analysis, the classification of a building with more than one major occupancy? Well, I put on the screen for you and also wrote for you in your course notes a number of references for you to check out in the building code. You will read them, but I'll give you kind of the shortened version of this, okay? But make sure you read these references. Well, what you do is you basically analyze the building for each of its occupancies. So you pretend that the building is all one occupancy or all the other, and then you make a conclusion from that. Make a conclusion from it. So in this case, let's start with, we have C and D occupancies. Let's pretend the building is all D occupancies. Okay, so every one of the C occupancies is now a D occupancy, so that the building has only one occupancy. That's great. According to topic 5, we know how to do that, right? So if we go through what we learned in topic 5, we would come up that 3.2.2.53 governs. Please try this out. Confirm that you can get the same result. Okay? Now, we did this, but that doesn't take into account all the occupancies that were C occupancies, right? Well, we repeat the whole process, and now everything that was a D occupancy gets changed to a C occupancy, so that the whole building is now a C occupancy and is analyzed as such using what we learned in topic 5. So what we find is out of all of those 63 articles, in this case, 3.2.2.44 applies because it's a C building, area of 2,000 square meters, 3 stories, facing 3 streets, no sprinklers. Great. We have 2 results. What do we do with them? Well, that's where we put it kind of together, right? Out of these 2 articles, we have to pick the most restrictive. So, the one for D occupancies, 3.2.2.53, says combustible or non-combustible construction, and that the fire resistance rating is 45 minutes. When we assumed that it was a C occupancy, we got that the fire resistance rating was 1 hour. Of the 2, which one is the most restrictive? Right, the one for C occupancy, the 1 hour one, right? So now we basically use this result, in combination with what we would get from table 3.1.3.1. Remember that? We touched on it in a previous topic. Okay? So let's bring it all together. And now the requirements for the C building apply, and that's for floors and roof. And then from the table 3.1.3.1 apply to walls between these occupancies, right? So, summarized as such, we get that for floors and roofs, we get 1 hour fire resistance rating according to 3.2.2.44. And the walls are themselves 1 hour resistance rating based on what we would get from table 3.1.3.1. Okay, so that's how you deal with multiple occupancies. We only played with 2 in one buildings, but you repeat this when you get 3 or more. Okay, you always come up with the most stringent scenario. Okay, and check out also some additional information that I've included for you on the screen that is also shown for you in your course notes. All right. Next item is building area. We touched on this in topic 3. Remember when I put this animation on your screen? Building area deals with the largest area that you can get from the most outside walls regardless of story, right? Okay, so go back to topic 3 and review this, all right? Because I think in topic 3 we even played around with the CN tower, I believe. Okay, so let's move on to building height. The first thing I want to do is go over what the building code defines as building height, which is a bit different from what you and I think of when we talk about building height. So if I'm looking for the definition in the building code for building height, where do I go? By now you know where to go. There's that location in the building code that has definitions, which is Division A, Part 1. Specifically, we're looking for Article 1.4.1.2. Let me read the building code's definition for building height so that we can discuss it. Building height means the number of stories contained between the roof and the floor of the first story. Okay? So notice how nowhere in this definition is a measurement mentioned, right? It doesn't say measure the distance between the first story and the roof, and that measurement in meters is the building height. The building height is the number of stories. And just so we're clear, stories is what colloquially you and I sometimes refer to as floors. That building is 4 floors high. Well, in the building code, it's 4 stories high. So in this case, as you can see on the screen, right here, okay, we have 2 buildings. You can notice how if I were to measure the height of the building geometrically, the measurement would be different. But according to the building code, both of these buildings have the same building height. They're both 1 story high. Now you might go, why is that? The reason is relatively simple. When the building code cares about building height, it's because it cares about how many people are going to be in that building so that the designer can set up the proper number of exits, the proper number of bathrooms, right? Because of the number of people in it. And the only way to do that really is not about how tall a building is, but rather how many stories there are. Because, like you can see in this example, when you have a story, there's only so many people that can fit on it, right? So in this case, even though the 2 buildings are different heights, geometrically, in terms of occupancy, as in people in it, it would have the same number of people. So it would be designed in that respect the same. Make sense? Okay, so again, the building height for the building code is not the height in meters, it's the number of stories. Let's look at another example. How about here? There are 2 examples. We have a building on the left that's 3 stories, a building on the right that is 1 story, and yet they appear as if I were to measure their height, I'd get the same measurement. But according to the building code, there are 2 different heights. The building on the left, its height is 3 stories. The building on the right, its height is 1 story. And that is important because the building on the left likely has way more people in it than the building on the right. Okay? All right. Now let's talk a little bit about basements, right? The definition of the building height is from the first story, the floor of the first story, to the roof. But you can have space under the first story, right? That's what we call a basement. So, do basement levels count as part of the building height? The short answer is no. Okay? By definition, the building height goes from the first story. Okay? So nothing, if it's a basement, it doesn't count. Now here's some information for you for fire-related safety features for basement levels. Check them out, read them. They're also linked, they're also shown in your course notes. But going back to basements and first stories, okay? What about a story that's half above grade and half below grade, right? Is that a first story? Is that a basement? So something like this. Is this a 3-story building or is this a 4-story building? Well, the building code provides guidance for that. Okay, the building code basically, first of all, defines building height again as the number of stories from the first story to the roof. It also defines the first story as that story where the floor of that story is closest to grade, and the ceiling of that story is more than 1.8 meters above grade, where grade is the average level of the ground level around the building. Okay, so you can see now, depending on how this first story is determined, something that we could consider a basement might actually be a first story. Let me give you an example. In this case, left and right buildings. Okay, are they 3 stories? Are they 4 stories? Well, let's look at the one on the right first. The one on the right, let's see, it's calling the most bottom level the first floor. And is that correct? Yes, it's correct, because according to the definition in the building code, the first floor is considered the first story if its floor is closest to grade, right, the outside ground level, which is basically right here. Okay? And the ceiling of that story is at least 1.8 meters from the ground level. In this case, that ceiling is 1.85 meters or 1850 millimeters. Okay? So that would classify as a first story. So this is 4 stories high. Let's look at the building on the left. The building on the left. The one that's identified as basement, well, that floor of that level, it doesn't look like is the closest to grade. Also, the ceiling of what's identified as basement is only 600 millimeters or 0.6 meters from grade. So it's way less than the 1.8 meters requirement for it to be a first story. Okay? So that's why you have to be careful about this. Building height, mezzanines. So mezzanines are typically what you would see as a partial story or those internal balconies. So think about, say, the ACE building. Okay, you know how the 5-story portion of the ACE building? Think of the ground floor. Okay, and if you're at the ground floor, you can look up and see the second floor, which doesn't cover the whole of the first floor, right? Because it has those study pods, right? And parts of the hallway don't cover the whole of the floor below it. So that's considered a mezzanine. The question is, do mezzanines count as stories when determining building height? Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. Obviously the building code gives very specific directions for this, okay? And here are the articles that I want you to read. They're also listed in the building code. However, this is the part where I take a break and part 1 ends. Part 2 is going to be linked for you in the location where you found mezzanines in your course notes so that you can continue the rest of this topic. Thank you so much for your time, and move on to part 2. Take care.